All right. It looks like we are live. Hello, everyone out there in TV land. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions for a very, very special episode of the Help Action series right here, part of the Life by the Square Inch, where we talk about RPGs, games like Dungeons and Dragons, things of that nature. If you don't know what that is, then here may not be the best place to start, but you're welcome anyways. Tonight I am joined by a very good friend of mine, Eli Kurtz, and we are going to be discussing interesting NPCs. So, Eli, you son of a bitch, how are you?
I'm good, you son of a bitch. I thought, so you told me, you told me I could swear, so it's only fair that I do.
It is. It's perfectly fine. No one who's watching this channel should be surprised.
But no, I'm doing really good. I had a really nice day. I got a lot of stuff done, and I'm super excited about this chat. I've been thinking about it all week.
Me too.
Well, you know, for a week. It's Monday, so.
Sure. Yeah. I knew what you meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I love this series. I always love talking about role-playing games, and this is something a good friend of mine, and Mike, he and I would stay up after D&D sessions and talk until 2-3 o'clock in the morning, just about whatever, about interesting spell ideas that we had, or like a kind of magic item that we were really wanting for our character and why, and how we thought it would be really cool. Just a lot of hypothetical shop talk. So I really enjoy these kinds of conversations a lot. And you and I have known each other for like 5-6 years at this point.
It's been a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talk a lot and we play together a lot. We're fortunate enough to have had that going most of the time that we've known each other. Mm-hmm. So I'm really excited to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of tonight's topic in particular with you.
Totally. Yeah. I, for everybody who doesn't know, I have a degree in theater and I've performed on stage for a big portion of my life. I haven't done it for the past few years. I'm doing mostly like podcast stuff instead, very much at my own pace. But yeah, I've got some thoughts on making characters and making them quickly and making them compelling. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I try to do really, I try to keep on point with the Help Action series is to try to find a topic that fits my guest really well, that it's a happy marriage. And I knew that I wanted you on the show at some point, but your name sat on my list for a long time because I just could not wrap my head around what I wanted to have you on for. Sure. And I don't even remember when it was, but I hit on the idea. I was like, interesting NPCs. That's always a fun topic to discuss. And I was like, who would be a good guest for that? And I was like, okay, no questions. Like, I know who I want to ask. So I'm awesome. I'm very pumped to have you here. So yeah, you have a project that's ending. I don't know, in a few moments here. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this is Oligarchy. It is a game of political folly that uses the trophy RPG system, which is being published by the Gauntlet. They finished their Kickstarter like maybe yesterday, I think. It did very well. And they have an open license for fan creations and hacks and that sort of thing. So me and a couple of friends of mine are making a game where, let me take a quick step back. In Trophy, you play treasure hunters who are greedily going into this forest that doesn't want them there and will drive them mad and pit them against each other and eventually destroy them. So it's a game that you play to lose. And I was really mad at politics one day and I was like, man, I just wish I could watch all these jerks in office lose, And then I was like, wait a second. Oh, I know a game that lets me do something like that. And so some friends and I got together, and the premise of this game is that you are corrupt elites and you are screwing the world over until the world stands up, the world and its people, and say, no more. And then they throw you out of there. So the Kickstarter has been going really well. We have, like you said, 3 hours left before it's over. And get on board if you're curious about it. It's going to be a zine. It's going to be quick and dirty and a lot of fun. So check us out.
That's awesome, dude. And I can't think of a more apt climb for a game like that to come out.
Yeah. And, the Kickstarter's done a lot better than we thought it would. So I think we tapped into something that's going on right now.
Maybe there's something there.
Yeah. It's been really nice.
That's awesome, man. I hope that it continues to do really, really well for you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good luck with only the few hours you have remaining.
Thanks much. The end is in sight.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, you can also catch Eli here on the channel in one of the campaigns that I run called Beneath the Banner Shadow. We play once a month. It's kind of Arthurian-based Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Eli plays Sir John. And, just like the other 4 players in that campaign, they all do a fantastic job. It's tons of fun to play. So
yeah, I gotta say a quick shout out about that too. I always love playing in your games, but this one is probably my favorite so far. The quality of the role playing and like the folks that you find to play together is always super high. But in the past games, I've always had trouble finding a character that I really like. And this one is that wonderful combination of both people that I love to play with and a character that I love to play as. And so check it out, folks. It's super dramatic and action packed and a great time.
there's a little bit of toil that goes on.
A little bit. Yeah, there's some suffering, some misery, you know, all that stuff too.
It's good fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And I think the first question is one of the questions that I always try to put kind of near the beginning. It's one that I like to ask each of my guests. This is the only constant throughout. When and where did you find gaming? How did you get into the hobby?
We have to go back to Bolivar, Missouri. In the early 2000s, there I was being a real nerd, and I was trying to find out ways that I could be a real nerd in addition to the nerdness I was living. And I don't remember how I found out about this, but a friend of mine named Kenny had a youth pastor who knew how to play Middle-earth roleplay. And I don't know if I had just finished reading Lord of the Rings at that time or if I was still just a Hobbit fan. But one way or another, I wanted to be a dwarf in Middle-earth. And so it was the situation where, you know, I worked up a 10 or 12 page backstory. I was super into it. I knew everything about the family history. I knew everything about the economics of my character's life. And we played for 6 hours. And all I remember about the game that we played is that we were in this guy's living room, and all I could not tear my eyes away from the TV that was playing like Terminator or something on mute. And I just could not stop paying attention to it. So I remember almost nothing about what happened in the game. But that was definitely my first time playing. And then there was another very early game that I played with another friend of mine named Spencer. It was D&D 3rd edition. It was right before 3.5 came out. And we both played gnomish monks. And he was both the dungeon master and a character. And the only thing I remember about that is that we teamed up against an orc, and one of us shot a crossbow into the orc's chest, and the other one jumped up and kicked the crossbow bolt the rest of the way through the orc's chest. And from then I was sold. When I realized I could do cool stuff like that, I was like, well, I'm not going back.
Yeah, at some point you discover that there's no training wheels. You know, right. There's no invisible walls here.
You mean I can do anything? Okay, let's do anything.
Absolutely. It's one of the beauties of this hobby. It's one of the things that is the most difficult to get across to people who don't know what role-playing games are.
Yeah. I've introduced a lot of people to gaming over the past few years, and it goes different ways. Sometimes people have a real hard time wrapping their head around the notion that they can do anything. Sometimes it's quite different. I had my wife and so my group of gaming guys in Chicago, where I used to live, everybody had a spouse or a partner of some kind. And so we were playing games, and then the spouses were all like, hey, we want to give this a try. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll run you through a game. And that was the most bonkers game I've ever ran in my life. Those gals were so eager to cut loose and do anything that came to their minds. They had the most outlandish ideas. They ended up just completely changing the course of this town's history forever. It was amazing.
I love whenever people sit down at the table and you can tell that this is something that they may not have ever experienced before in life, but they completely get it.
Yeah.
And there's that click, and when the click happens, that light goes on, and I love players like that because they're typically not, I hate the usage of this word, but jaded. You know,
Oh
as a
yeah.
gamer, when you've played for years and years, you're like, oh, it's a dragon. How big is it? Okay.
Yeah.
You're already thinking about what action you're going to take. You know, it's, you know, but if you play with somebody who's not used to this and they're not jaded against that, and you talk about how large this dragon is, they're like, what? Like, you know, his teeth are how big? You know,
Right.
they're genuinely taken in by the simplest of the descriptions and the
Right.
interaction that they get in the game, and
Yeah.
it's
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 like
the
the
good
first
stuff.
time you survive a dragon encounter is a big deal, and then the first time you actually beat a dragon in an encounter is an even bigger deal, but you're going to be chasing that dragon for the rest of your life.
So true.
Right?
Awesome. That's cool, man. I think you're the first person that I've ever talked to that has come to role playing games via the Middle Earth role playing game.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a deep cut. I never played it again after that first time. I've never even been able to find the books anywhere, but it's kind of cool that I wasn't necessarily starting with D&D. I kind of wanted to, and I went to D&D right afterward, and I stayed there for many years, and it was a wonderful time. But it's kind of fun to be like, oh yeah, you know, I was one of those old gamers whose first game was something completely different.
Yeah, my first game that I played was actually the D6 West End Games version of Star Wars.
Oh, I hear that's great. I actually own it, but I've never read it.
Mhm.
I got it for free from a friend.
It's a really interesting game system. I didn't learn very much playing in high school because the two friends that were actually running the game and that I was just a player in, they didn't really like to stop and explain why we were doing what we were doing. I was kind of joining a campaign that they had already been running, and so they just gave me like a Wookiee like person who just ran around and smashed things, which I was perfectly okay to play.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, smashing's fun.
Yeah. So I didn't find D&D until a little later.
Yeah,
But I was 14, so I wasn't too much past the curve.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I was around that age too. Yeah, it's a good time to get addicted to games, you know.
Right. Yep. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring up the first talking point that I had. When you need to improvise an NPC in the moment, what are some tricks for making them feel fully realized? From where do you pluck that particular brand of instant inspiration?
Yeah. So, first of all, I've been a lifelong bullshit artist. My whole life, it's just been really easy for me to come up with any random thing out of thin air, you know, a characterization or a line or whatever. And so that helps me a lot, and I think that's more or less a natural advantage. But something that I want to say to start this off is that practice makes perfect. You know, you got to get out there. Like a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, I think, is stuff that anybody can apply to their games, but you're not going to be amazing at it at first, and it's not going to feel supernatural at first, but probably won't feel terrible, and you'll learn a little more every time, and you'll get better at it every time, and you'll be able to make these transitions more instantaneous every time too, to different characters or different ideas and that sort of thing. So tips to get into character quickly. I like almost every character that I make, whether it's an NPC or a PC or whatever, uses this thing called the goat. Have you ever heard about the goat in your theater training? Okay, so the method came around in the 20th century, and after it had been around for a little while, some people were like, you know, maybe what I want is not an acting style where I'm supposed to feel first and act later. Some people thought, no, through action you arrive at emotion. It's the opposite direction. And so they came up with this thing called the practical aesthetic school of theater. And I can't remember anybody who's really prominent who came from it. Like a lot of the people were Broadway actors, they're not national stars or anything. But the idea is it boils down to the GOAT, an acronym, GOTE. It's goals, obstacles, tactics, and expectations. And so if we break those down a little bit, goal is what does your character want? And it can either be immediate, this is what I want right now, or it could be more like your super objective, the thing you're trying to achieve over the course of a session or a campaign or whatever. Obstacle is what is keeping me from getting what I want. Tactics is what am I going to do to get what I want, to overcome that obstacle and reach my goal. And then expectations is kind of a weird one. I don't know that it's defined super well, but it's a little bit of both. What will I do once I get what I want, and why do I think I will achieve what I want and get over that obstacle? It's sort of motivation and the next step. But the most interesting part of that to me is tactics, and every tactic is a verb, and it helps when there's super interesting verbs. So when I have a character, I might have a character voice, or I might get into a little bit of physicality, you know, hunch over, stoop my head, lift up really high, lift my nose, that sort of thing. But it's always about what do they want and what are they doing. So, for example, there was a character in our Ring Down Below game, bad guy in the first season. This is a Blades in the Dark campaign that Jeremy and I played with our friends Derek and Barron, and Derek is on the show in the chat right now. So hello, Derek. But one of the early antagonists of that game was, where is he on this map? He is somewhere. LaRose, that's right, Officer LaRose. And he was this Irish bastard who was after your character specifically, Jeremy. And he was always kind of, I thought of him as aloof, and I thought of him as conniving. And so whenever I had tactics, I was trying to belittle you. I was trying to scare you. I was trying to cut off your angles and make it seem like I was a mastermind or something. I was never letting you come up for air. I was harassing you. I was haranguing you. I was preventing you. And all of these verbs were helpful for me in the moment. It's like, okay, I get into a scene with Jeremy's character and I got to get something out of him. Okay, I know that I want to get information about the next race. So what am I going to do there? I'm going to prod. I'm going to trick. I'm going to scheme, these things. And the more interesting verbs you can come up with, the more fun it is to portray that character. And then expectations, like I said, it's kind of weak. And I think it's less applicable for role-playing games. It's like, well, because I'm a pompous ass is why I think I'm going to get what I want. Or when I get that, I'm going to put him in jail or something like that. But it all boils down to those core four, the GOAT, the goal, obstacle, tactics, and expectations.
It's really interesting. I've never heard that.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree. And I think this is something that I kind of internalize, that this is not anything that I knew by name, but it's definitely not dissimilar to the way I go about it. I watch a lot of movies and television, and I have my entire life. So I find myself able to quickly draw on tropes and character types that I've seen before. Even if I don't necessarily remember exactly where it's from, I can usually understand what is needed from a particular character in a particular moment based on the variety of stories that I've consumed. And I just kind of pull from that and just insert that right into the situation. And I typically have an idea of what the character wants, kind of where they're trying to get the scene to head, and what they're willing to do, kind of how far they're going to go. Because ultimately I know more than likely, if they're antagonists at least, that it's not going to end well for them.
Right. And you have to know at what point are they going to cut and run, or are they willing to fight to the death over this?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. So yeah, it's really cool to hear terminology kind of put to it.
Yeah, and Steve Fillmore from the chat pointed out that Practical Aesthetic, the most famous proponent is William H. Macy as far as acting goes. But David Mamet, the playwright, is also early adopter of Practical Aesthetic.
Yeah. That makes sense. Um, yeah, I think a lot of times people get caught up in the the thought loop of what is the right response for my character to have in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you find yourself thinking about it that hard, you've lost the path at some point,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to just go back and just think about the situation you're in, who your character is, and from there should be a gut instinct that comes up that, oh
Yeah.
man, I think they'd be really pissed. Then be pissed.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay if the scene turns out a little rough at the end between you and somebody else's character, then you just pull that player aside and say, hey, I want you to know that that was purely in character. We're good, right?
Totally.
Like,
Yeah. And even, you might get into a scene and it goes in a direction you weren't expecting. Maybe you thought you knew where it was going to go and then it went somewhere else, or maybe you had no idea where it was going to go and it just ended up in a place that you were really surprised by. Those things are okay and they can be really interesting. And if it turns out in the rare case that those aren't okay, you can always talk about just retconning it and saying that it never happened or something. We're all here playing a game and trying to have fun. So it's okay to just make it work for you. And I think you were talking about how it kind of just comes to you. There's a gut feeling, and I think that that's one of those things that gets trained and you can get better at. But it's like when you go hang out with your friend for lunch and you're eating sandwiches and you're talking to each other, you don't know where that conversation is going to go. But when your friend says something to you, you think about a response, and then you say it. And usually the thinking about it part is very brief. Uh, there's just a little bit of abstraction to be able to do that with a role-playing game character too. As long as you are kind of inhabiting the character, once you get into that conversation, the things that you are going to say are going to flow naturally. Even if it ends up being the case that the character is just very much like you in real life, well, you know how to talk in real life. You can do it in a game too.
yeah, absolutely. It's one of the big tenets from the community college where I studied theater was, if you're acting, stop. Like,
Mhm.
if you're in the scene and you find yourself acting, then you need to cut it out and you need to take a step back and then reapproach what you're doing in the scene.
Yeah.
He said, don't ever act on stage. He actually said, don't ever act on my stage. But he was just kind of that guy.
Turns out a theater professor was egotistical. I'm shocked. Shocked, I say.
Yeah, at a community college, no less.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead with Karen's question.
Mhm.
She had asked, do you have any tips or tricks to help your NPCs feel real and individual rather than all of them seeming like they are cut from the same cloth? So, touching a little bit on what you kind of said about having your NPCs or your character behaving like you in a situation. Over
Yeah.
the course of a game, if you find yourself having too much similarity between your characters, do you have any tips or tricks for making them feel different and fully realized?
Yeah. So I really like character voices, and I've it's another one of those things that I practiced for a very long time, so I can slide into and out of them pretty easily. But I think that the basics are pretty easy to impart for beginners. And you're going to feel silly for a little while at first, but you remember when you first started playing role playing games and you felt a little silly playing pretend. It happens in this hobby. It's just something that goes on. But I would say the two things that I do for helping to make characters feel real. First of all, I like to find real people that I might base them off of. So going back to that Inspector LaRose example from Ring Down Below, I really wanted to play a Blades in the Dark game because I was watching Peaky Blinders at the time, and I loved that show. And Sam Neill has a really cool character who's an inspector in the beginning of the show, and he's got this fascinating Irish accent. He's this, oh, oh, Mr. Campbell, what are you doing there? You got to get out of here, And he's got this really fascinating sort of delivery of all of his lines, and so I just would be playing a video game or whatever, and I'd be talking out loud to myself and just practicing the dialect, and then I could kind of summon it whenever I needed to. The other thing that I do is that I'll change my body language for different characters. So it might be kind of loud when I roll my chair away, but like if I am playing a British butler, for example, I'm going to be way up high, and I might be right here, and I change my voice a little bit, but really it's all about this physical posture of mine, even if I'm on a camera across the internet or something. Whereas if I'm going to be this big hulking guard type, then I might hunch over and I might get down here and like growl a little bit like, Death Clock or somebody. But here I am, and the difference between here and here is pretty quick to switch between, and all I have to do is change the way that my body's going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, holding yourself is probably one of the biggest ways that you can embody a character.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, it's not literal, obviously, that you're wearing this character. There's a question about this a little later on, but that's really kind of what you're doing. You're almost stepping into their body, and it helps way more than you might actually give it credit for.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's something that you start to kind of feel uncomfortable, that's fuel for your character, because they likely have either felt that discomfort or are continually feeling that discomfort. And then you can start imagining what that's going to do to their psyche and how they're going to approach situations. One of the great examples was people, whenever they have to do something like sneeze or cough or burp or, fart, whatever, when they're on stage and there is no, cutting and coming back to the scene, you have to keep going. One of the things you have to kind of learn early on is that your character does those things too. And you just have to learn how to do whatever's going to happen and you can't control in character.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. You got to just kind of go with the flow, and it helps for you to think about some of those little idiosyncrasies for your character, how they might sneeze, how they might burp, if they pick their nose, that sort of thing. It can be really helpful you always want to try and find a key for the character. Maybe the character is maybe the posture is the key for the character. Maybe there's a mannerism that's the key for the character. Maybe they have a really itchy scalp and they just can't stop doing that. Or maybe they're sniffing all the time. Yeah, hey, I got a cold right now, but otherwise I'm basically the same as always. I'm just feeling really sniffly. Sorry, everybody. And that can kind of create a feeling of character depending on how it arises naturally.
Absolutely. And usually the stuff that is the best for you as essentially a performer, an actor, is things that are the most different from you, because those things are going to be anchoring points for you to take yourself out of your own way of thinking and doing things, and will help you transition between you and another entity, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you feel more comfortable.
The one point of biggest difference is important. Although it's also worth saying that no matter how talented you are, you're going to have your limitations. I just recently took a vocal coaching session with a couple of my friends, a few of them actually. So there's Aaron Catano-Saez, there's Ali Grauer, and there's Drew Merzieski. All of them are on Twitter. They're all very good. They have private lessons available, hour at a time, 2 hours, whatever. Check them out. But I found out, for example, that you talk about vocal placement, like you can have your voice up in your head, and that's typically a really nasal sound, or you could have it in your chest, and that's a little bit more of a bright sound, or you can have it in your gut, and it's a much more grounded kind of sound, or you can even get all the way down to your pelvis kind of area, and it's all about where you're centered and grounded. And I really am not great with my pelvis and not great with my gut either, but I have a wonderful head voice. So a lot of what I do for characters is try to figure out ways that I can tweak my head voice. I can do like an operatic style head voice way up here, and that can be good for a superhero voice or even a radio announcer or something. Or I can get really nerdy with it and just get way up in the front of my nose, and then I'm kind of a dweeb. Yeah. So finding that one major difference can be really helpful for building characters.
Absolutely. And especially with NPCs, because NPCs are going to typically be coming and going. If you're lucky, running a game with a reoccurring NPC, then good on you. But most of the time, you're going to be doing 3 or 4 NPCs in a single session.
Right.
Much less what you're talking about over the life of a campaign. So ways that you can latch on to easily kind of slip into their character, especially if it is a repeatable character, find it quickly, make it memorable. So it's something really off the wall or kind of kooky, or the way they speak is, very different from the way you normally engage them. And then when you're done, you can just drop it, and they don't have to have a complex backstory and all of this kind of stuff going on. If they have something that's kind of memorable about them and they're clear in what they want, typically that leads to pretty memorable NPCs.
Yeah. And I will say also, with a lot of my games, it might be the case that every character of a certain background sounds very similar. In a lot of the Blackwood games that I run, which is my own fantasy setting, the innkeepers are almost always from up north. They're like, you walk into the inn and they're like, oh, hey, you want something to drink? You want to get over there? And it just so happens that all of them, it's like a cultural thing for them, I guess. But yeah, you can get repetitive like that too. It kind of depends on how many characters are in your game and how many you need to represent to people. If you don't have the skills, it's not going to be the end of the world if you just repeat some stuff, because this is free entertainment, everybody. we're not paying money for the movies.
There's a hard truth in there.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, before we get too much further on, I'm going to go ahead and tackle this question from Derek that was about the GOAT method. Do you come up with these verbs in preparation for your game? When you sit down, do you sketch out what these are for these different NPCs?
Sort of. I kind of rely on the training that I've had for the past many years in this sort of thing. And so I'm able to improvise it a little more. But especially in the beginning of using this technique, anytime I had a character, I would just write out, what are their 3 or 4 strongest verbs? What are the things that they like doing the most? What tactics do they employ most often? And once you do that for a dozen, 2 dozen characters, you start to get more aware of what verbs you are really good at inhabiting, what verbs you're really good at doing, and it makes it a lot easier for you to call on those in the moment.
Yeah, that makes good sense. You find your strengths and you hit them, just like anything else when you're running a game and being a dungeon master. The things that you are comfortable with doing, you don't have to prepare as much. And the things where you feel that you have a weakness, prepare those more.
Yeah.
Have those ready to go.
Yeah, for sure.
For me, one of the things that I find, again, I don't tend to think of it in verbiage. I might start trying that now. But one of the things that really compels characters in my mind is finding a good portrait for them.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a huge fan of fantasy art. I love a bunch of different kinds of styles, and I'm constantly perusing art websites and all this kind of stuff. I have several artists that I follow, and there's a thing that happens with me as I'm looking through art where I see one that sparks the muse, if you will, in my mind. Instantly, I start getting some kind of story or personality or something that comes off of the screen for me. And I know that that's one that I really want to use. So I save it and I tuck it away for later. And I know people have kind of mixed feelings about that, but I would never, ever try to claim them as my own or make any kind of money off of them. But they are a spark plug for how I'm going to describe and present and depict something in a game of mine.
Yeah.
Huge.
You use Pinterest, right?
I used to until they blocked it at work.
Oh no! Yeah, I love Pinterest for finding character inspiration.
Yes.
It's kind of hilarious how different my Pinterest is from my wife's Pinterest. Hers is a lot of like homemaking stuff, recipes, hair, like tattoo ideas, that sort of thing. Mine's like dwarves and elves and pictures from medieval armories and museums around the world and stuff like that. But it's super helpful to find those characters through, like, I'm a very visual person, so it's really easy to find inspiration from the millions of wonderful images available in nerd culture.
Absolutely. And again, when I find a good one, especially of a person, I definitely study it pretty closely. Almost the same as like an actor would looking in the mirror when you're trying to find a character. Again, kind of how you're going to hold yourself. I will sit and stare at the eyes in particular of a character's portrait. Maybe 5 minutes or so, just kind of saying, okay, like what's going on inside that head, kind of picturing them as a real person. Why are they standing that way? Why do they have their hand on their sword? What does this symbol on their clothes mean? Oh, he's going gray. That means he's probably seen quite a few years. Maybe he's pretty wise, or I don't know. He looks like he's kind of dumb, and making a lot of snap judgments, truthfully, and kind of basing how I'm going to depict the character off of the little details that I'm pulling out of a really good portrait.
Totally, yeah. And you can even mimic the portrait. You can look at that character's face and get in a mirror and try and make your face the same. You can look at that character's posture and try and duplicate that. And then just walk around, talk for a little while, see what that feels like to inhabit those body characteristics for a little while, and see if you can get any insights into how the character works. But I love that, really scrutinizing the image. And there's so many wonderful details in all these images too. That's the thing. The creativity of the RPG world is just immense. It's unreasonable. And I love getting lost in a good character image. It's the sort of thing I wish I had $1 million so that I could just buy all sorts of commissioned art of characters that have been bouncing around in my head my whole life. It'd be great. But here we are.
I feel that. Hard saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's get to some more of these talking points. You kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but how many of your NPCs have been based on real people, celebrities, as opposed to like the characters they might portray in media? Are there any that you have based on people that you have known in real life?
Well, let's see here. I think as far as real life goes, I've probably in games, if we all are good friends and we know the same people, there might be a time when I like kind of lampshade a person that we all know. But generally, people that I really know in real life, I might take tics or mannerisms from them, but I won't do like a full character of them. And it's not necessarily even because I feel gross about it. It's just, I don't know. Most of the time, I only see like a very specific little detail about the way a person behaves, and I think, oh, that's cool. I want to duplicate that. As far as celebrities, I think I probably portray a lot more fictitious characters than I do real people. The Sam Neill character was obviously an example of a real actor, but I was portraying more the character than the actor in that circumstance, right? I think I've done like a Jeff Goldblum impression because Jeff Goldblum is always Jeff Goldblum. He's never really a character. So that sort of thing happens every once in a while. I'm sure I've done like an Arnold impression or something while I'm playing a game. But generally, I think cartoon characters and, like you said, character art are way more common sources of inspiration for me.
I think it's fair. Yeah, I think everybody's probably busted out their Arnold impersonation at some point or another, especially if there's a helicopter involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or if there's a guillotine even. It still works.
It's true. It could go either way. Perfect. Okay, rolling right along. Let's take Derek's question. Oh no, we got Derek's question here. I forgot to switch it out for the one.
Jeremy.
Next. I know. What is wrong with me?
For shame.
Who's running this show? This question is from Dice Ogre. Dice Ogre says or asks, are there NPCs that you find harder than others to roleplay? I know that some GMs have issues playing certain villain types. for example?
Yeah, sure. There are characters that I'm just not good at playing, that I don't really know how to wrap my head around, and there are characters that I don't want to play. There are both. I'm trying to think of examples right now. I have trouble playing characters who are really cruel. I find it hard to be cruel. And like I don't think I've ever played a character who likes to torture people, for example. I just there's a lot of stuff that the motivations behind it are really alien to me, and especially the ones that are more violent and sadistic and that sort of thing. I'm like, yeah, I don't quite know how to do that. I'm much more interested in characters that are ideologically driven and see themselves as sort of a noble hero, as opposed to somebody who's willing to do anything.
I can understand that. I definitely don't have trouble, as you well know, playing characters who will resort to torture. Uh, and that has nothing to do with an interest of mine. I have no interest in actually torturing people in real life. Thank you, NSA.
Right.
But I don't know. I find it kind of challenging, I guess.
Sure.
To see if I can portray a character who's willing to do those things and keep them realistic.
Yeah.
To not have them just deteriorate into a mustache twirling, tie people onto the rails kind of villain. As far as characters that I find hard to play, I know there are some, but I don't know that I can come up with any of them in my mind right now.
Right. I'm usually so busy just trying to do good with the ones that I know how to do. It's like, oh, I don't even know what I don't know.
Yeah, very true. I definitely do play characters who gravitate towards trying to do the right thing, or to being kind of the hero type. Mm-hmm. Correcting wrongs where they see them, stepping up for innocent people.
Yeah.
That kind of.
Yeah. And for NPCs, I'm trying to think here. There are character voices that are challenging for me. In terms of like characterization, I don't know. And I think it's because the main thing that I do when I make a character is I just try to make them human, like natural, like identifiable, relatable, So I'm always trying to find pieces of myself that I can blow up, or pieces of my friends that I can, or celebrities or whatever that I can copy. And when I'm focused on those little things, it makes even really outlandish characters pretty easy. I played a game in a friend's campaign where I was a slab of floating rock. But I just kind of did like a Optimus Prime voice, and I slowed it really down. And so I was a big, oh no, I was the guy from Neverending Story. These look like big, strong hands. I just did that the whole time, and it worked out just fine. So even the really outlandish stuff, if you just find the one thing that makes them relatable, I don't think I have a super difficult time portraying characters unless I just feel really greasy or whatever when I'm playing them.
Yeah, there's definitely places that I'm not comfortable going as a role player, just period.
Sure.
Especially depending on the group that I'm in. And most people, again, who are familiar with this channel know that there's quite a bit that I am comfortable with and willing to put into my games.
Yeah.
But there are definitely some icky places that I have no desire to portray.
Agreed.
Well, cool. Let's go on then, if we can, to something else that you kind of talked about quite a bit. You've spent no small amount of time studying as a staged actor. In what ways do you feel that this has prepared you for role playing? And are there any ways in which you feel that it may actually hinder you?
Yeah. So, how do I think it's helped me? First, I think that one of the ways it's helped me the most is that I've never really lost the comfortability with just being silly. I I don't have a lot of uh, bash to be full of. I don't have a lot of nerves when it comes to making an ass of myself for a little while. And so I'm willing to play around and just have a goofy time and let the dice fall where they may, proverbially. What was the second part of that question? Has it hindered me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when you're acting in shows, you have no free time, so you can't get scheduled to play games. That's a hindrance for sure. But in terms of other stuff, I don't know. I think I see a lot of actors who don't embrace the improv quite like they should. And they will try to, especially when they're new to games, try to script things out, try to make things happen in a certain way. And you really got to let go when you're playing a game. You got to just, cut loose and play with your friends and see what happens. Uh, yeah, I think if anything, it would hinder me in the sense that I'm used to structure and I'm used to lines. And if I get into an improv situation, there's a moment where I have to process first.
Yeah, I mean, it's improv in theater is a strange beast because for the most part, now there's huge exceptions to this, but for the most part, you're discouraged from improving unless the scene is going sideways. Somebody's forgotten a line, somebody's missed a cue, a prop breaks, something unexpected happens and people are caught unaware and the scene can't or won't continue in the direction that's been rehearsed. Then you have to rely on improvisation to kind of get you back there as quickly as you can and not make it glaringly obvious that you're doing so.
Right.
For the most part, that's really the only time in theater that we used improvisation. Now, there's all kinds of exercises that help you with improvisation that you typically do in theater circles, and there's entire shows that are improvised, which are beyond me how in the world you would do anything with lighting and tech and sound and everything like that, but they do it.
I watched an improvised Shakespeare show in Chicago once upon a time. Iambic pentameter the whole time, rhyming verse, improv. I had no idea how they did it.
that baffles my mind.
I know, it's so wild
to be able to think that way and respond in the moment. That's crazy.
It's a real good show, though.
I imagine if you get to the stage of that game, that stage of the game, I mean, yeah, it better be a good show.
You got chops.
Absolutely.
I want to call out really quickly. Derek in the chat said, "I always feel like I think of the best response 5 minutes after it's already past the moment." Whoo, big mood. Yeah. It's the story of my whole life, and that's one of the reasons why earlier I said you just got to pretend and get comfortable being silly. This is free entertainment. It's not going to be brilliant.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So one of the other preloaded questions that we had, one of quite a few from Ben Fisher. Mm-hmm. He says, "What 3 things do you find most effective in creating memorable and fun characters?"
Yeah, so the GOAT, first and foremost, giving somebody a strong action is that whole purpose of the GOAT. So we can count, an actionable character makes them fun and good. I like to give characters quirks. I kind of naturally drift toward comedy in RPGs. I can do some suspenseful or horror or dramatic stuff, but it's way easier for me to just pick that low-hanging comedy fruit, and so if you can have a quirk or if you can do some description of physical humor or whatever, that's a good way to make characters memorable. And then I don't know, like a unique description thing. Do they wear a feather in their hat? Do they always have a pistol in their right hip? How do you got to think about, you got to set up those moments where you meet somebody in episode 3 or session 3, and then session 20 comes along And it's like you look over at the bar and you see somebody with a hat and you know that hat. That's the gold in an RPG game, right? You gotta be able to set up that long game where you can just reference one thing about a character and everybody's like, oh, I know who this is. Ooh, it's so exciting.
Yeah, I think also for me, it's probably not a good thing. But for me, one of the easiest ways to make a NPC memorable is to pick at least one person in the party and they have an issue with that person.
Yeah.
And they're not shy about it.
Get them tangled up.
Yeah, I mean, it's instant conflict. Even if they're not ready to go to blows over it necessarily, you don't have a character stat block ready or anything. Like, maybe you don't need it. But having an antagonist in the scene will always create conflict, and these games are all about conflict and resolution. That's the whole cycle of these stories that we're telling. So I think if you can give that to someone, what that does is not only does it give them actionable motive, for the player who they're aiming this animosity towards, they're going to have a response.
Mm-hmm.
You may not know what it is, but they're going to have a response, and more than likely, the rest of the NPC or the rest of the PCs in the party with them are probably going to come to their aid. And if they don't, it's going to create really interesting drama.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I think that having when I talked about the GOAT and having a strong action for your character, one of the ways to make that action really strong is to point it directly at one of the PCs, directly at some other character. If you're a PC, find yourself an NPC and you swear rivalry with that person. And every time they come across the screen, you're hurling insults or you're drawing your sword or whatever. Yeah, definitely getting tangled up is a good way to make a character memorable.
Awesome. Okay, so we have another question from Dice Ogre. He says, have you ever made a character that has had a lasting impact on yourself, like a moment of enlightenment about yourself, or maybe a character that made you change a personal opinion?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. The first character that comes to mind is one that I did in an actual play series called Welcome to Warda, which was also by Ali Grauer and Drew Merzieski. I played Sandir Chonali. It was a world where Fae existed, and they all were tied to elements. And so I was a Nayati, which was a water Fae, and I was the paragon of victory and masculine beauty. It was this character who was like a cross between. He was like a non-toxic Gaston mixed with Captain America's Boy Scout vibes and Special Agent Dale Cooper from Twin Peaks, sort of serene advice-giving vibes. And Sandir was so much fun to play. And I just have, like, whenever I feel kind of in the dumps in my real life, I just need to pick me up. I'm like, what would Sandir do? And almost always he would give an inspirational quote that's just barely related to the situation, but he would smile while he's doing it, and that's enough to get me through. So that's probably the most recent character that's made an impact on me. I'm sure there have been others. And I know there are games that I've played that have made a huge impact on me as like a designer and a gamer and just as a human being. But sticking just to characters, I think he's probably the most recent one for sure.
Yeah, Erasmus is actually one of those characters for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually where the name comes from. I had written down this name that I heard in my intro to anthropology course that the teacher had written on the blackboard, and I thought it was a really interesting name, Erasmus. And when I wrote it down, because of her cursive, I misspelled it. It was M-A-S as I wrote it down, as opposed to how it's really spelled, M-U-S.
Yeah.
But anyways, I tucked that away into my backpack, and later on when we started a role-playing group with the drama people in that college, I was searching for a character name, and I said, oh, wait a second, I wrote down a really cool name. So I pulled it out of my backpack, and that became that character's name. And playing Erasmus was when I really fell in love with what Dungeons and Dragons was capable of.
Yeah.
The kinds of stories that can be told and the kinds of heroics and relationships that are kind of built over time and have an eventual payoff, and how that's really, really rewarding. And Erasmus very much became the cleric that wanted to do the right thing. Again, protect the innocent people, stand up to the bad guy because no one else will. And through doing that, I came to realize that Erasmus was really the representation of what I wanted my inner hero to be.
Yeah, very cool.
And so he is definitely the litmus test, for me of, am I doing this right, or would he have done it different? Would he have tried to do something different?
I love RPG's potential to create heroes, our own heroes, in that way.
Absolutely.
My Twitter handle is AppDynamic. It's also one of my very first role-playing game characters, the first one that I ever played in a campaign. And he's this wisecracking swashbuckler who's super into parkour and rapiers, and not at all on brand for Eli James Kurtz. And yeah, it's just really fun to carry a character along that way and to let them inform your life. I think everybody ought to do it. Give it a try, folks.
Yeah. And that's why I am a proponent for finding things that you can put of yourself into a character. Don't divorce yourself too much. Now, for an NPC, when you're running a game, that is a slightly different thing. But especially if you're going to be playing a character for a while, you need to be able to identify with them on some level, in order to kind of root for them as you're going. Okay, let's get to. How about this one? Okay. As a GM, you have to fail so that the heroes can succeed at some point or another. The story that you're telling belongs to them, after all. It's their tale. So with every NPC that has these antagonistic goals to the PCs, you're going to ultimately lose. But even through that, you have to portray them with realistic goals and motivations that will keep them interesting. So how do you reconcile these two ideals? Believably pursuing goals that they are unlikely to ever actually achieve.
Yeah. So I think the first and maybe truest answer is that I'm not very good at this. I think whenever I'm making a character, I just give them an agenda, and I just kind of hope that the player characters overcome it. And I'm kind of a pushover when it comes to being a GM. I'm a very big fan of my players, and I want them to succeed. So if it's the case that the enemy's got them up against the cliff and they're about to push them off, I'm like, oh, whoops, there was a rock in the enemy's shoe. We better take advantage of this opening. But I think if an NPC has a motivation that they want to accomplish, making it, like, finding the balance has more to do with the way you express that goal instead of how achievable it is. If your character wants to take over the world and turn everybody into puppies with some sort of chemical spray, that is a goal that they're never going to achieve because the players are going to stop them before billions and billions of people are turned into puppies. Although, who knows? Maybe that would actually be better. Bad example. You know what I'm saying, though. No matter how big and ambitious your character's plan is, or how small and achievable your character's plan is, if the player characters intervene, it's probably not going to happen. And most games are tilted more towards success than failure, so you can be pretty certain that the characters are going to succeed. And if they don't, Well, that's a surprise where you call for a bathroom break and you go into the bathroom and you pace for about 5 minutes and decide where the story's going to go next.
How do I unfuck this situation?
What have they done to me? What have they done to me?
Oh, my beautiful plans, my campaign.
I had all these signs pointing right and they turned left. No.
Now they have to go into the forest and find themselves at the mountain.
Crap.
Yeah, I mean, it's it can be tough having to constantly set up villains who are trying to achieve these goals that sound and maybe even feel realistic, but you know they're going to be thwarted over and over again. And the best advice that I can think of to give is you just have to put on your big boy pants, because that's part of the job, really. It's just part of being a dungeon master with, like you said, most systems that you're going to run.
Yeah.
It's about the players or the characters being pushed to the edge of failure, challenged to the point where even seasoned players might start to go, maybe we're not going to get out of this. And then they tip the scale at the last moment. There's this clutch move, a great die roll or spectacular role playing, what have you. And all of a sudden, now they can see the light at the end of the tunnel and they come out on top succeeding. So that's typically the way that these things go. And you have to understand that as a dungeon master, you're just doomed for failure.
Yeah, it's like you are supposed to portray the world, but really you're also supposed to be a fan of the players. And that balance can be hard to achieve. I think this is a really good question, but it's like, well, you just try the thing and let the players beat you. And then if they don't beat you, well, what an interesting surprise.
That's a good way to put it. It's almost like parenting. Like when you're going to sit down and play a game with your child, like you're rooting for them. You want them to win. You want to have that confidence. But sometimes you're going to whoop their ass at, Halo, and they're just going to have to get okay with it.
Like, was that frustrating? Yeah, you know what? Life is frustrating sometimes.
Booyah! You slam the controller down.
Tough, but it happens. Mess with the bull, you get the horns.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, so let's get another question from Ben here. When you are acting, what is your process for you to wear the character or get into the character's skin? What are you thinking as you prepare improv responses? Is it nearly automatic while you do so, or is there a thought process involved?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much automatic in the best moments. And in a lot of moments, it comes pretty quickly, but it's not like automatic. I think to get into a character, physicality, the voice is really important. I also really like key phrases. I might not always keep the same key phrase for a character, but if like Sandir Chundali earlier, right? I can get into that character just by saying Sandir Chundali. The name is all that I really need to get the voice going. And then if I'm really having a struggle getting into character, then I'll also say an Iodi paragon of victory and masculine beauty. And that's almost always enough to just get it done. Other characters, and a lot of it kind of depends on what's happening in the scene. If the PCs break through a window just as the bad guy is working on their potions for the bomb that they're building or something, I don't know, then that's a pretty frustrating situation. The bad guy's just been interrupted in his task. Is he angry? Is he just annoyed? What's going on there? And then you can use that to get into the emotion of the character too. If the character would say something like, well, look what we have here. Is it, well, look what we have here? Or is it, oh, well, oh, look what we have here? Is it flippant? Is it derisive? Is it shocked? what do you do there?
Yeah, and I think understanding your character is pretty key to being able to make those kind of leaps, sudden leaps into their persona. And
Yeah.
again, like you've said a couple of times already, like most of us aren't making any kind of money doing this. Like it's okay if you don't nail it, whenever the scene surprises you and you have to suddenly portray this character. Like it happens, and it happens to all of us. And having like a small, depository or a repository of go-tos that you kind of revisit every once in a while, and somebody might say, well, isn't that the same character that we, and it's not, that's fine. It's okay. And it's even okay to just say, it's not the same character. You guys just took me off guard, so we're just going to roll with it and just keep going.
Yeah. And in my experience, a lot of players that I play with don't remember the characters that I introduced previously. So if you have a different character uses the same voice, if it's a few sessions later, it might not even matter.
Very true. Well, sometimes even the ones you wanted them to remember.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. We have another question by Steve. He says, have you ever had an NPC that you liked so much that you let them get away or live when they shouldn't have? So like a bad guy who shouldn't have escaped, but you had grown too attached.
Yeah. So there may have been moments when I think if I had done that, it probably is something that I did toward the beginning of my time as a GM and not much afterward. It's the sort of thing where you realize pretty quickly that snatching victory from the hands of your players is not very fun for your players. So you do that a couple times and you're like, oh, why does nobody want to play with me? Well, maybe I should stop doing that. But I definitely create characters and situations for those characters where I'm pretty sure they will be able to escape if it's a character that I want to set up as a long-term villain. So Inspector LaRose is a good example. The first few times you met up with Inspector LaRose, it was always on his terms. It was usually as a result of an entanglement from Blaze in the Dark. And it's like, oh, well, there's some show of force on the streets, and that means Inspector LaRose has 6 or 7 blue coat guards in front of him, and they're the ones who are roughing up people on the street. He's got his personal detail at either side, so he's really protected. It would take a lot to be able to get after him, but it's a chance to introduce him. And then, oh, maybe he sends a telegram or a message. You can't attack him when he does that because he's not there. And so finding ways where death is not an option can really help you to prolong the life of a character, so that you don't have to try and finagle away where they survived. Although also, if you're playing the right kind of game, like a cartoony kind of game or something, it can be really in keeping with that game for the bad guy to fall off of a cliff. And it's like, well, we didn't see a body. That means he's coming back next episode. Get excited.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great idea to have a villain, and this is not something that you want to do all of the time, because it does get old to be on the receiving end of. But having a villain that is introduced earlier on, and maybe they run up against, 2 or 3 times throughout the length of the campaign before the big payoff battle at the very, very end, when they finally get to give this person their comeuppance. That is really rewarding, because it increases the investment, and it really makes that payoff at the end very, very satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, in any contemporary television series, whenever there's a character that everybody just loves to hate, and finally, 2 or 3 seasons in, when that character finally gets it, everybody's like, it's about time, like they feel vindicated. So I think that's a good thing to do with an NPC, or with a villain in particularly, every once in a while. So having contingencies that feel right. Maybe they have a scroll or a potion of teleportation or dimension door, or whatever your game system of choice that you're playing in happens to have as a quick getaway.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they've the PCs come up onto the roof, and the villain is already in the helicopter getting ready to take off, and he's shouting over the sound of the rotors, and he shouts his monologuing insult at the players as this helicopter takes off and starts to fly away. Having those kinds of moments is a really good idea.
To kind of flip this question just a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
I remember one of the coolest things that can ever happen to you as a GM is that you create an NPC that you are going to kill, and one of the players decides, no, I will do anything to keep this character alive. That happened in Ring Down Below with Tuto, the basically like alternate coloration of Derek's character. I made him just as a caricature of that guy, and he existed mostly as just a caricature of that guy the whole time too. But then there was a score you guys had where you were going to lure two of your big enemies into your hideout and then blow up your hideout. And at the very end, I said, "Oh no." You notice you didn't get this roll to escape just right. And so you notice that your friend Tuto is walking toward your hideout, has no idea this thing's about to blow up. And Derek cashed in everything he could to go and at least pull Tuto far enough away that both of them only got really fucked up instead of Tuto just straight up dying. And that moment, I'll never forget it. That was so cool to be like, I made a difference in this character's life.
Yeah, the ones that they love and the ones that they hate are absolutely the best.
Yeah.
I thoroughly, and this might say a lot about my psyche, but I thoroughly enjoy playing villains who get under the skins of the player characters.
Yeah.
I love doing it because I know in the future, I know that all I have to do is pluck that little string and somebody's going to respond in a big way.
Yeah. I was watching some clips of Clone Wars recently, the Star Wars cartoon series, and it was all of Darth Maul's lightsaber fights because I'm a fight nerd. And he is so good at pushing Obi-Wan's buttons throughout that series. I think every time they have a conversation, Darth Maul knows exactly what to say to Obi-Wan to inch Obi-Wan just a little further away from the light side. And Obi-Wan always comes back and recenters himself afterward. But Darth Maul is so good at pulling those strings. It's great inspiration for any game master.
It's a good call. It's just a damn good series overall.
Oh,
very excited about
started watching the new season.
I haven't started it yet because I know it's going to be a deep dive when I do.
Well, I'm kind of sad that I started it because they're only doing it one episode a week or so, and I'm like, I want to binge, but here we are. Not the life we live.
Not so much yet. Okay, awesome. We've got just a few more that I want to get through. So one of the things, one of the other questions that Ben Fisher asked is, and we've already touched on the first part of this enough. He said, what are your favorite methods to create an NPC? I think we've kind of gone over that. But he asks, how long does it take on average?
To make an NPC?
Yeah, to create an NPC.
Yeah, so I'm using the example of Ring Down Below a lot because that's the last time I ran a real campaign that had characters and that sort of thing. So what I'll do is, for those characters, I found a portrait like you do for a lot of your characters. I spent some time editing those character portraits to make them legally distinct. And then I would, while I'm working on that, sort of think about who are they and what is it that they're trying to do to the party. And once I've got those two things down, I generally have a pretty good idea about what kind of character they're going to be. If they're going to be stoic or animated or like vile or heroic or whatever. I will have some basic ideas about that. So like how long it takes. I also work kind of slow, so I let things happen gradually in stages over a long period of time. But like, I don't know, maybe a couple hours for a character if I'm feeling really into them and I want to explore them a lot. Otherwise, If I need an NPC in the moment, I can do one in like 5 seconds. It's just not going to be a very interesting NPC.
Yeah, and I think the ones that you make fast are the ones where you really rely heavily on the tropes, the
Oh
things
yeah.
that are familiar. It's you go to the bin that you have right beside you, and you just pull one. And sometimes, again, it's the snap judgment. It's not necessarily the call that you would have made if you had a lot of time to think about it and prepare. But it is usually a perfectly sufficient judgment, and if you just run with it most of the time, um, that's one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand about role playing and acting is 70% of what you're doing is about just going for it, just
Mhm.
ignoring your inhibitions, understanding that you're going to probably be nervous or feel silly and ridiculous and doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And once you kind of get over that hurdle of, oh God, it's going to be so, ooh. And once you get over that hurdle, that falls away. That feeling dissolves, and you find yourself just kind of enjoying what you're doing. And that's going to just lead to you wanting to do it more or to push it further. Um, so that's really the biggest secret, I think, that a lot of people seem to not understand about this.
I agree. And I love games that help you get acclimated to that silliness. The one that I'm working on right now is called Errant Deeds: Tall Tales in the Blackwood, and it's the revised edition of the Blackwood setting for a Forge in the Dark rule system. But at the beginning, I have every player character recite the Errant's Call, and it's this little speech that they trade off doing a line each, and it's flavorful and it's like over the top, and it's just something that they all do that's silly together, and everybody sort of gets into character together in that way and gets comfortable being silly together. And I was taking inspiration from like Swords Without Master by Epodiah Rabichal, which, if you've never read that game, it's one of the most pleasant games to read in the entire world. It's first of all an amazing game, and everybody should have a chance to play it. But what the first thing that you read from there is something like, "You are about to play Swords Without Master. Gather yourselves around a table. A cruel slab of black obsidian on the top of a mountain, or perhaps a slab of rich mahogany in a low hall with many fires burning and meats on the fire." It's just such a good job at building up that character and getting you hyped to be pretty silly. So yeah, any game that does that sort of thing in any capacity, sign me up.
I agree, and that's one of the reasons why, for my games that I run online, I have everybody try to come in about 15 minutes ahead of time. Not only is it when I'm able to kind of work out technical issues, of which I have many, in setting the game up and getting it to run smoothly online and everything, but also because that's the opportunity to kind of break up the ice a little bit. Everybody gets to socialize, kind of ask how everybody's doing, get on page with one another. And then usually by the end of that 15-minute window, people feel a little looser. They're a little more comfortable, especially if you've been playing with the same group over, a period of time.
Yeah.
It helps to kind of not have those frigid, everybody just got together nerves, still competing with kind of getting into character.
Yeah.
Having a little bit of time is um, a good ingredient, I think, to include.
Icebreakers are good.
Okay, we got another question from Derek. How can you involve your players in the creation of NPCs?
Oh yeah. I like to do a lot of that actually. Whenever there's a random NPC, especially, I like to, if it's a character like, some player character is in the tavern and says, "Well, I go over and I talk to this guy in the corner." I'm like, "I didn't even say there was a dude in the corner. What am I going to do about this?" I'll say, "Okay, well, what does this guy look like? What are they doing?" And if I get a couple of details like that, I can usually at least make up the rest of the character on my own. And then otherwise, the characters influence the NPC in the sense that they are constantly interacting with that character's actions. Whether they're helping that character or whether they're hindering that character, they're going to be building that character's story in those interactions. And that's going to give me a lot of fuel for how to play that character in future sessions.
Yeah, that supplies you with their motivations and goals oftentimes.
Totally.
Awesome. Okay, we have 2 more questions that I kind of wanted to get to, and then another topping point. I think. Nope. Okay, never mind. These 2 questions are not quite as related as I thought. I was going to see if I could combine them. But Ben Fisher has another question, and it's the obligatory question of doing voices or not. Whether you're great at them or not, what advice do you have for people who maybe aren't as good or studied at doing voices?
Yeah, so I like to layer my voices when I create them, which is to say they've got ingredients and I put those on one at a time when I'm building the voice in the first place. So I had a dweeb character that I played in a game that Derek ran. I think it was a Savage Worlds superhero game. And he was this asthmatic nerd. And so I had my normal voice, and then I knew that I wanted him to be kind of a nasal nerd. So I got up here and I was talking basically just to like myself, but just up at my nose. And then I realized that he is a little uncertain. So I started speaking slower when I was doing this. And then he's really nervous. So I would quaver my voice every once in a while. And he's kind of always asking questions, and then sometimes I would even put some vocal fry in there, and then all of a sudden he kind of sounds like he's constipated a lot, so he's probably just physically uncomfortable a lot of the time. And before you know it, that's very different than my normal voice. But because I just did a few layers at a time, nasal, slower, question marks, and then vocal fry. Those things are all things that most people can do. Vocal fry is probably the most chancy one there, but gradually staging those in there just based on things that you know you can do can really build some cool character voices.
Absolutely. I like attempting voices. I am not good at very many of them. There's certain ones that I just gravitate away from because I know that I'm just going to fall flat on my face whenever I attempt them.
You're also very good at some of them, though, just to be clear.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
It's all done through mimicry. I don't have a lot of formal training in as far as that kind of stuff goes.
You and me both.
But I do have those usually kind of in my pocket, and I'm kind of ready to pull those out if I feel like I need to. But I like trying. Even if I fail, most of the time I'm okay with at least having tried and learned, ooh, that's one I can't do. Maybe I'll practice that. Or if it's bad enough, I just won't even attempt it.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, there's so many other things you can do with your voice to change your voice. That doesn't have to be an accent, or it doesn't have to change the dialect of the way that you're speaking, changing your choice in vocabulary, giving yourself a stutter if you don't have one naturally. It's a little harder to get rid of a stutter if you have one naturally, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Raising the pitch of your voice, slowing down the pace at which you speak, where you put the emphasis in a sentence, the kinds of things you say and how animated you are when you say them.
Yeah, like the vocabulary can tell you a lot about the character's intelligence, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you're playing, a grognard, barbarian, thick skull chimerian, you're probably not going to drop a lot of 3-4 syllable words. So if you can, try to curb those from whenever you're talking in character. So yeah, a lot of it comes down to just truthfully, just kind of trying to embody the character as much as possible, trying to get out of your own headspace and allowing yourself to fully dive in, if you will.
Yeah, and I noticed in the chat, Derek said he still wants to play a character that doesn't use contractions. I think it's so great to have just one thing that you want to try out with a character sometime. If it's that they don't use contractions, is that they have a high-pitched voice, if it's that they speak slowly, whatever. if you have one thing that you can try out on a new character every time, after 5 characters, you've got 5 new things that you know how to do. And that's one of my favorite ways to build character capacity, whether it's voice or characterization or whatever.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And especially whenever you think about it in components like that, when you get one down that you feel comfortable with, you can put it in that little bag that you keep beside you and
Exactly.
pull it out if you need it in the future. Absolutely. Okay, so we've got a question from Dice Ogre. Intelligent items, familiars, voices in the head of other characters. How do you convey the non-human elements of these kinds of characters?
I am such a big fan of the creepy whisper. Most of the time when I'm playing some sort of non-human creature, it's usually kind of creepy. And so it might talk like this, or it might talk like this, and it's even more character-y, whatever. But I also like to, with non-human stuff, make it not a thing of speech and to describe feelings that the person is getting whenever they're interacting with this other item or character or whatever, images that they're going through their head. And then if it feels like I've bullshitted a description that at the end I'm like, oh, well, that's probably not really helpful to convey the information that I need to convey to the character, then I'll say, and the impression you get from that is overwhelmingly I'll just tell them what I want them to know.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. There's another player named Nico Dawson, Nicholas Dawson, and he's actually a previous guest on the series. That he has this method that he uses when he runs games that I've kind of adopted, and that is to describe after a line of dialogue intent that you don't feel came across as if it was read out of a book. So you say your line of dialogue, you're never ever going to stop me. He lies. That's a good way that doesn't split the narrative. It doesn't pull immersion, but it gets the point across. If you feel like it was missed otherwise.
Totally. Yeah. Love that stuff. And I rely on it maybe a little more than I should because I get insecure about my characterization sometime. And I want that extra security blanket.
Oh, I think that's good stuff. Not everything that is narrative has to come out of your character's mouth. It can come out of your mouth as a player. Sometimes the most powerful things that your character can go through are things that they're not vocalizing. It's just about how you describe it as a player. As far as Dice Ogre's question, for me personally, with these kinds of entities, this is where I feel much more comfortable venturing into the more cartoony voices. Most of the time when I'm portraying humanoid NPCs, I tend towards more realistic vocal depictions of them because I want them more relatable, because the issues that arise between humanoids are typically social issues. So identifying them as people makes them more relatable and therefore the conflict more interesting. But it's going to be hard to relate to, a bugbear chieftain who's been eating children for 3 weeks. There's not really going to be a lot of redeemable social conflict in that situation. So not having them be an identical human with human-like qualities is kind of a signal, I guess, to my players that, hey, this is likely just headed in a direction that's going to end in, violence.
Yeah, you got to develop that shorthand.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. Well, I've got one more talking point, and then my final question. Let's go ahead and get this talking point. It's a little more of a serious one, but a topic that I know is very important to you, and that is the representation of marginalized groups, particularly when it comes to gaming. And as a cis white American male, how is it that you practice inclusivity in the diversity of your NPCs regarding things like race, gender identity, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and other areas? without venturing into the territories that others might feel are racist or sexist or homophobic, and like.
This is an excellent question. So I think the first thing that I do has nothing to do with characterization. I just try to play games with people who are different from me. And I try not to be the game master when I do that, because I want to. The real advice whenever I'm doing a character is that I don't do what I don't know. And if I'm trying to learn from somebody who's very different from me, it's hard for me to do that when I'm also juggling a game. So I will play a game alongside them, and I'll be quiet and I'll watch what they're doing and I'll see what kind of stuff I can pick up. But when it comes to portraying characters who are different from me, it is a really fine line. The most important expression of don't do what you don't know is don't try to create a don't try to speak with the voice. And I'm not talking about voice work. I'm saying, like, I'm a white guy. I'm not going to have a character in my game who is black and is speaking about the black struggle, because my struggle is not the black struggle, and the black struggle is not mine. I don't know what that's like on a day-to-day level, and I can't portray that faithfully. And so I have characters of color, and I have characters of different walks of life, queer characters, characters just with accessibility needs, that sort of thing. And with all those characters, I just make that their detail, uh, or not even that. It's just a part of them. It's like there was a character in Ring Down Below who was the sort of foreman for the dock workers, and he was a black character. And I used like a Southern accent for him, but I used Southern accents for everybody who came from that region of the world, no matter what color they were. And so that wasn't necessarily special. The only way that people would have known, oh, this character is black, is looking at the portrait. And I feel like that's kind of the limit of what I can do as a white guy. I can put those faces and I can put those identities into the world, but I can't tell their story. They're parts of the world, but they are characters that I don't try to make the prominent characters, you might say, because I am not close enough to be able to do that well.
Yeah, this was something that I found myself wrestling with when I was creating and running the two Asian themed Dungeons and Dragons campaigns that I've run.
Mm-hmm.
One of my homebrew worlds has like 11 different cultures in it, and they're all based on real world cultures or amalgamations of real world cultures. And when I run them, one of the things that when I run campaigns that are set in that world, rather, one of the things that I push really, really hard is the fact that the cultures are so different depending on where you are in the world. So I really like to hit notes about those particular history or those particular cultures, mythologies, and the way they dress, and the kinds of monsters that might exist in their mythology, and all of those kinds of things. I like to try to incorporate as much of that as I can. And it's definitely, like I said, something that came up in my mind whenever I started thinking about the NPCs and how I would play them in these games. And obviously, you never, ever, ever play a race as a source of comedy.
Oh, yeah.
That is probably the biggest X that I can think of.
Yeah.
That is when it's just not appropriate. Ever, truthfully, but especially not in front of other people. And I think beyond that, you just have to find kind of the way, if you're talking about voice in particular, because that's one of the things I think where a lot of people tend to go wrong. They end up doing a caricature of a voice,
Yeah.
which is it can be difficult because, I mean, whenever I go to do a French accent, it's a very typical French accent. It's a super duper, cliche, but that's about the range that I have of doing a French accent. And so if I'm doing a particular race, for example, I just don't do the stereotypical accent for that race.
Right.
I just find other ways to change my tone or the pattern of the way I'm speaking. Like a lot of the NPCs were very Japanese themed, and so a lot of Japanese people in the movies that I watched preparing for this speak very slowly, very deliberately, as a cultural thing. So I tried to make that come across in my depictions of the characters instead.
Sure.
So I think that's the way you described it as being a very, very thin line. I think is probably the best way to put it.
For sure. And I'll add too, I think in terms of character voices for these characters, I love dialects. I love doing a lot of different kinds of dialects, and I've done a lot in my life. There are a lot of dialects that I don't do anymore because I know better about how those are perceived by the world. And so when I'm doing a dialect, it's almost always limited to, in fact, it is always limited to a European or American dialect, because those are the ones that I can claim for myself, are the ones that I've trained hard enough to be able to do with justice without being a caricature. Other dialects, even if privately I think I'm good at them, I just won't do them because it's so easy to turn a dialect or a character voice into a caricature, and you don't mess with that. As soon as you start incorporating real world elements, you immediately ought to get a lot more respectful than just standard like character fantasy voice or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. So my follow-up question to that, since we went really serious, Bill and Ted Face the Music.
Okay.
Will they return to save us as it was foretold by Rufus?
We do very badly need them. I want to say two things about this. First of all, I saw a screenshot today from the show, from the movie. So as far as I know, yes, they will come back to save us. Second of all, be excellent to each other is life advice that I hold very close to my heart. So yeah, we do need them. And fortunately, we can still follow the lessons while we're waiting for them to appear. They're the King Arthur of our times, is what I'm trying to say.
Wild Stallions.
I do also have to admit, I've never seen a Bill and Ted movie. I know.
This video is over.
It's
as is our friendship, sir.
No. Oh, no. I'll fix it tonight. Well, I won't fix it tonight. I'm going to watch some more Star Wars tonight, but
no. They're definitely a thing that has a large weight behind them because of nostalgia.
Oh, for sure.
I doubt that they have aged very well.
Well, I'll find out and I'll let you know.
Sounds good.
Perfect.
I'll hold you to that. All right. Well, Eli, thank you very, very much for coming on and discussing interesting NPCs with me this evening.
Yeah, you bet. And this is a really good chat. I hope people got some good stuff out of it. And I know I did. So you better have audience. But yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. I've known about this show for a while. I've been quietly over in my corner like, ooh, I wonder if I'll get to be on the show sometime. This is a really fun conversation. So thank you very much.
It really was, man. Thank you very much. Like I said, I love doing this. I love talking shop and getting to do so with people that I admire because of their skills or things that they're just naturally good at in the community. I enjoy bringing those things together. And again, as always, if I have a rapport with that person, even more, even better. So I honestly do appreciate you coming on and spending the last hour, 45 minutes, give or take. Thank you very, very much for anybody who may have tuned in this evening and joined us in the chat. Thank you very, very much. I do appreciate that. If you are watching in the future, thank you as well. Please go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you like this kind of thing. There's a lot of other, well, as a matter of fact, there's at least 20 others of these episodes on the channel that you can find, as well as a ton of live plays and other videos of that nature. There will be another help action next month. My guest will be Ted Adams from Nerdarchy. He will be coming on to discuss mechanics in your games and how you can try to do those in interesting ways, I hope.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. And like I said, you can catch Eli over at his channel. I believe the link to that channel is in the description of this video. If it is not, I will remedy that situation very, very quickly. And if nothing else, if you're just being obstinate and don't want to go check out his stuff, shame on you. But if you don't, you can at least check him here on the Erasmus Expeditions in our monthly campaign, Beneath the Banner's Shadow. So, until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.